All right, welcome to the deep dive. You shared chapter 1 of James Clear's Atomic Habits with us.
Yes.
So that's where we're going today.
Sounds good.
We're gonna take a deep dive into those foundational ideas that he lays out right at the beginning
Yeah.
and really understand the core of his argument. How these tiny, seemingly insignificant changes
Mm-hmm.
can actually snowball into really remarkable results. And you mentioned you're keen on gaining knowledge quickly,
Yes.
but thoroughly. And that's exactly what this deep dive is going to be all about.
Yeah.
It's designed to give you a shortcut to its core concepts
Great.
without totally overwhelming you.
Absolutely. I think this opening chapter really is the cornerstone of Clear's entire framework.
Okay.
He's laying the groundwork for a really powerful way of thinking about improvement in any area of life.
Yeah.
And it all really hinges on grasping the kind of unexpected potency of these atomic habits.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. Chapter 1 kicks off with a pretty compelling story, the saga of British cycling.
Yeah.
I mean, for almost a century, their performance was, shall we say, less than stellar.
Right?
One gold medal at the Olympics since 1908.
Wow.
And not a single British victory in the Tour de France in 110 years. It got so bad that a major European bike manufacturer, they wouldn't even sell equipment to the British team.
Really?
They were worried that it would damage their brand, if other pro teams saw the Brits using their bikes. Talk about a reputation.
Yeah, that really paints a picture of how far they were from the top.
Yeah.
Just mired in this long history of mediocrity.
Yeah,
The idea that they could even become competitive, let alone dominant,
right.
must have seemed incredibly far-fetched at that point.
Totally. Okay, so then in 2003, enter Dave Brailsford.
Yes.
He comes in as the new performance director, bringing with him this intriguing strategy called the aggregation of marginal gains. So what's the core principle that makes this approach so powerful? I mean, it sounds like it's more than just being detail-oriented, right?
Exactly. It really was this insightful shift in perspective.
Okay.
So instead of seeking out like one big game-changing breakthrough, right, his philosophy was about scrutinizing every tiny facet of cycling and then figuring out how to enhance each of those aspects by just 1%.
Yeah.
The idea was, if you meticulously added up all those small improvements, the cumulative effect would be truly transformative.
And they really embraced this idea wholeheartedly, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just, like better bike saddles or using alcohol on the tires for enhanced grip.
Right.
They delved into these incredibly fine-grained details, heated over shorts to keep muscles warm, biofeedback sensors, to really understand how athletes were responding.
Wow.
Rigorously testing different fabric types in wind tunnels, even having their outdoor racers, switch to those lighter indoor racing suits just to get that aerodynamic edge.
Absolutely. I think what those examples really underscore is this belief that no stone should be left unturned
Yeah.
in the pursuit of excellence.
Right.
So it forces us to reconsider what we might normally dismiss as insignificant and recognize its potential contribution to the overall outcome. But, the examples get even more interesting.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, where this philosophy really shines. Like, they were looking for these 1% improvements in areas that most people wouldn't even consider.
Wow.
They were testing different massage gels to find the ones that led to faster recovery.
Okay.
They brought in a surgeon
Right.
to teach the team proper hand-washing techniques to minimize the risk of getting sick.
Wow.
They were identifying the ideal pillows and mattresses for
Wow.
each individual rider
Really?
to optimize their sleep. They even went so far as to paint the inside of the team truck white
Wow.
so they could easily spot tiny specks of dust that might affect the bike's performance.
I mean, this sounds like a form of hyper-optimization.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess when you're going for those marginal gains, that's what it takes.
Right.
But the results were pretty incredible. I mean, just 5 years after Brailsford took over,
Yeah.
2008 Beijing Olympics, they absolutely dominated,
Yeah.
took home 60% of the gold medals available in cycling.
Wow.
Then in London 2012, they shattered records left and right, 9 Olympic records,
Wow.
7 world records.
Yeah.
And then you have Bradley Wiggins becoming the first British cyclist to win the Tour de France in 2012.
Right.
And then multiple wins from Chris Froome after that. It was an unbelievable turnaround.
It really was. This team that was once, kind of a source of national embarrassment, they become this dominant force on the global stage.
Mm.
And it all started with this commitment to small incremental gains.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how do those seemingly inconsequential changes actually lead to such extraordinary results?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the central question that I think this Chapter 1 example is raising.
Right.
And it's exactly what Clear starts to explore in more detail.
Yes.
So the story of British cycling shows us the what, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
this remarkable transformation.
Mm-hmm.
But now we need to dig into the why behind it. Like, why do these small habits have such a profound impact? And I think Chapter 1 emphasizes how easy it is for us to get fixated on those big headline-grabbing moments
Right.
and completely overlook the quiet power of consistent daily improvement.
Yeah.
We often think, you need to take these massive, visible actions to get significant results.
Right.
But what Clear points out in Chapter 1 is that improving by just 1% each day, it might seem totally insignificant, in the short term.
Right.
Sometimes you don't even notice the change.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the long-term trajectory, the math is pretty astonishing.
Yeah, he gives that great example. Like, if you get 1% better each day for a year,
Mm-hmm.
you're not just a little bit better, you're like 37 times better by the end of the year. And conversely, if you get 1% worse each day, you decline almost to zero. So that seemingly small daily win or setback actually accumulates into something much, much larger over time.
It's the compound interest of self-improvement.
Yes.
Right? And that's how Chapter 1 puts it. It's just like, money grows exponentially over time with compound interest.
Yeah.
The effects of our habits multiply as we consistently repeat them.
Right.
So on a day-to-day basis, they might seem negligible. But over the span of months and years, the impact becomes enormous.
That's right.
It's often when you look back that you really appreciate the accumulated value of those positive habits.
Right.
Or the significant cost of the negative ones, I guess.
Absolutely.
I think that's where maintaining motivation can become a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because in our daily lives, these small incremental changes often feel like they're not making a tangible difference.
It's true.
Like saving a small amount of money today doesn't suddenly make you wealthy. Going to the gym a couple times doesn't instantly transform your physique.
It's true.
Studying a new language for an hour doesn't make you fluent.
Right.
So we make these small efforts, but we don't see results quickly.
Right.
And it's so easy to become discouraged and revert back to our old, comfortable routines.
They're very easy.
And the opposite is true too, right?
Yes.
With bad habits.
Right.
The gradual nature of decline often lets them slip by unnoticed. One unhealthy meal.
Right.
One night of insufficient sleep. One instance of procrastination. The immediate consequences, they don't feel that bad.
They seem manageable.
Yeah, it's easy to rationalize, just a single poor choice.
In isolation, yeah.
But it's that consistent repetition, day after day,
Yeah.
of those seemingly minor 1% errors,
Right.
right? Those slightly less optimal decisions,
Mm-hmm.
those tiny overlooked mistakes, the conveniently rationalized excuses.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that compounds into significant negative outcomes over time.
It does.
It's the accumulation of those small declines
Yeah.
that eventually leads to a substantial problem.
That's right.
Yeah. I really like that analogy in Chapter 1 of the airplane, right?
Yeah.
Altering its course by just a few degrees,
Right.
right? At the moment of takeoff, you barely notice it.
Yeah.
Just a minor adjustment.
Yeah.
But when you magnify that deviation over the entire distance of a cross-continental flight,
Yeah.
you end up hundreds of miles off course.
That's a great way to put it. A very visual way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and that's really how it is with these habits too, right?
Yeah.
It's these seemingly insignificant shifts
Mm-hmm.
in our daily habits. They can steer our lives towards vastly different destinations
That's right.
over the long term.
Absolutely.
Making a choice that's just 1% better or 1% worse might not feel like a big deal in the moment,
Yeah.
but those moments, they accumulate, right,
They do.
into a lifetime.
Absolutely.
They ultimately shape who we become. Success isn't about these rare, once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
Right.
It's the product of our daily habits.
That's right.
It's not even necessarily about your current situation, is
Sure.
it? It's much more about the direction you're heading in.
Exactly.
Chapter 1 makes this clear with the example of the millionaire who consistently spends more than they earn,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they might be a millionaire today, but they're on a negative trajectory.
Right.
If they keep up those spending habits, it's pretty easy to predict where they'll end up.
That's right.
And conversely, someone who's broke but consistently saves, a small amount each month,
Yeah.
they're on a path towards financial freedom,
Right.
even if it feels really slow and boring in the moment.
Yeah.
Our outcomes are what Chapter 1 calls lagging measures of our habits.
Yes.
Right? So your net worth is a reflection of your financial habits.
Right.
Your body weight reflects your eating habits.
Yeah.
Your knowledge reflects your learning habits.
Yes.
And as Chapter 1 states, you get what you repeat.
So true. If you want to get a clear picture of where you're going to end up, all you have to do is examine those tiny daily gains or losses
Right.
and see how they're going to compound over the long haul.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about how these habits compound. Now let's look at how that compounding effect can be both positive and negative.
Yeah.
Right? Let's start with some positive examples. Think about productivity.
Right.
Consistently knocking off one extra small task each day. It might not seem like much in the moment,
No,
but over a career, that adds up to a lot of extra work,
it does.
especially when you factor in things like automating tasks, mastering new skills.
Right.
The impact can be huge.
It could be huge. And what's interesting there is that often those positive effects start to create a virtuous cycle.
Oh, interesting.
They build upon each other. So take knowledge acquisition. Learning one new concept doesn't make you an expert,
Yeah.
but sustained commitment to lifelong learning.
That's truly transformative. And each new piece of knowledge can reshape how you understand things you previously knew.
Yeah.
So it creates this kind of upward spiral.
Yeah.
I think Warren Buffett famously said, that's how knowledge works. It builds up like compound interest.
That's a great quote.
It really captures this beautifully.
And relationships experience this compounding effect too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The more you proactively help others,
Mm-hmm.
the more they tend to want to reciprocate and support you.
Right.
So consistently being a little bit more thoughtful
Yeah.
and considerate in your interactions can build a really strong network of connections over time.
It's a reciprocal dynamic.
It is.
Now let's flip the script and look at the negative side.
Okay.
Chapter 1 highlights how easily things can spiral downwards.
Yeah.
Through the compounding of detrimental habits. Stress is a great example. These seemingly minor daily frustrations. Traffic, work pressures, money worries.
Right.
Individually, they might seem manageable. But if they persist over years, they compound into serious health issues.
Yeah.
And then you've got these negative thought patterns.
Yeah.
They can create these self-reinforcing cycles.
Yeah.
The more you habitually think negatively about yourself, the more you condition yourself to interpret experiences through that same lens.
Right.
And so you end up in this loop
Yes.
of negative thinking.
Yeah,
Same principle applies to how you perceive other people.
it does.
And then there's the compounding of outrage.
Right.
Chapter 1 talks about how, large-scale social movements, riots, protests, things like that, they're rarely triggered by a single isolated event. Right?
Yeah.
It's usually a long history of smaller grievances
Yeah.
that gradually accumulate over time until some event just becomes the tipping point,
That's right.
right? And it ignites this larger response.
Right. It brings everything to the surface.
Yeah. And that idea of a tipping point leads us to the next big concept discussed in Chapter 1, which is what progress actually looks like.
Yeah.
The chapter uses this really effective analogy, comparing it to an ice cube in a room where the temperature is slowly rising,
Okay.
right? So the temperature goes from, say, 25 degrees to 31 degrees. And on the surface, nothing seems to be happening.
No.
But then as soon as it hits 32 degrees, that 1 degree shift unlocks this dramatic change.
Right.
And suddenly the ice starts to melt.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand with that ice cube analogy
Yeah.
that those breakthrough moments, they're often the direct result of all the preceding actions that have been building up the potential for that change to happen.
Right.
It might seem sudden, but it's been developing for a while beneath the surface.
It has. Yeah.
We see this pattern everywhere,
I
right?
could do. Yeah.
Like the slow growth of cancer before it's detectable.
Yeah.
Or the years bamboo spends developing its root system underground before it shoots up.
Right.
So this is incredibly relevant to habit building because our efforts often seem to yield no tangible results until we cross that threshold and reach a new level of performance.
It's true.
Chapter 1 calls this the valley of disappointment,
Yes.
right? Where we expect linear progress.
Yeah.
But instead, it can be so frustrating to see how ineffective your efforts seem at first.
Right.
Like you're putting in the work, but you're not seeing the the needle move.
Yeah.
And that feeling of being stuck or not making progress, it's so common with anything that involves compounding
It is.
because the most significant outcomes are delayed.
They are.
And that's a big reason why building habits is so hard. People start a few positive changes. They don't see immediate results and they give up.
Yeah.
They think, well, I've been doing this for weeks.
Yeah.
Why isn't there a difference?
Exactly.
Right. But Chapter 1 reminds us that struggling to build good habits or break bad ones, it doesn't necessarily mean you lack ability or willpower. It often just means you haven't crossed what it calls the plateau of latent potential.
Yeah.
So thinking back to that ice cube,
Yeah.
all that energy that went into raising the temperature from 25 to 31, it wasn't wasted.
Right.
It was being stored.
Yeah.
The change just wasn't visible yet.
That's right.
And it's only when you hit that 32-degree mark
Yeah.
that all that stored energy manifests as a visible transformation.
And that's when people often label it as an overnight success.
Oh,
Right. But what they fail to see is all the consistent effort
Yeah.
that came before that moment.
It's like the analogy they use in Chapter 1 of those tectonic plates, right?
All right.
Grinding against each other for millions of years.
Yeah.
Slowly building pressure until, boom.
An earthquake erupts.
Yeah, an earthquake.
Right.
It took eons for that process to play out
Yeah.
before this sudden dramatic event happens.
Takes right.
And then they also quote Jacob Riis. And this is a quote that's often associated with the San Antonio Spurs.
Okay.
And it's about the stone cutter who hammers away at this rock 100 times without a crack showing.
Right.
And then on the 101st blow, it splits in two.
Yeah.
The takeaway is that it wasn't just that final blow that did it.
Right.
It was the accumulation of all those blows that weakened the stone.
Exactly.
Chapter 1 gives us this helpful visual of this concept, Figure 2, the plateau of latent potential.
Yeah.
Right? We expect this linear progression.
Right.
Our effort leads to immediate results.
Yeah.
But in reality, significant outcomes are often delayed.
That's right.
And that's what leads to that valley of disappointment.
Yeah.
But it's a good reminder that even when it feels like you're not making progress, your efforts are still being stored. They'll pay off eventually if you keep going.
Yes.
Okay, so with all this in mind, the compounding of habits, the delayed nature of progress,
Yeah.
Chapter 1 introduces a really thought-provoking shift in perspective.
Okay.
It says, forget about goals, focus on systems instead. And this might sound a little bit counterintuitive, especially given how often we're told to set goals.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the author even shares their own experience,
Yeah.
trying to set goals, whether it's for their grades or their weightlifting or their business.
Right.
They often got mixed results.
Yeah.
And what they realized is that their results were way more correlated with the systems and processes they followed than the specific goals they set.
Interesting.
So Chapter 1 gives a really clear distinction between these two concepts,
Yeah.
giving credit to Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert.
Okay.
Goals are about the results you want to achieve,
Right.
right? But systems are the processes and routines that lead to those results.
The how.
Yeah, exactly. So let's make it really practical.
Yeah.
Right? A basketball coach, their goal might be to win a championship, but their system is how they recruit players, how they manage their staff, how they run practice.
Right.
An entrepreneur, their goal might be to build $1 million business, but their system is how they test product ideas,
Yeah.
hire employees, do their marketing,
Right.
That's right.
A musician, their goal might be to master a difficult piece of music,
Right.
but their system is their practice schedule,
Yeah.
the techniques they use, how they get feedback,
Yeah.
right? So Chapter 1 poses this interesting question.
Yeah.
If you completely disregarded your goals
Okay.
and just focus all your energy on your systems,
Yeah.
would you still succeed?
Interesting question.
So that basketball coach, if they just focused on making every practice as effective as possible,
Yeah.
would they still get great results,
Right.
even without thinking about the championship?
Yeah.
I think Chapter 1's argument is yes. In sports, the goal is to get the highest score, right?
Right.
But you can't just will that to happen by staring at the scoreboard.
No.
The only way to actually improve your score is to focus on your training, on your performance,
Right.
day after day.
Right. It's the process.
Bill Walsh famously said, the score takes care of itself.
I like that.
So if you want better results in any area of your life, Chapter 1 suggests shift your focus from setting ambitious goals,
Yeah.
to actively designing and optimizing your systems.
Okay.
Now, Chapter 1 isn't saying goals are useless, right?
Oh.
It acknowledges they can be useful for direction, for clarity.
Right.
But it's the systems that drive the actual progress.
Mm-hmm.
And they outline a few problems with focusing too much on goals.
Okay.
First problem is that winners and losers often have the same goals.
Right.
Right? Everyone at the Olympics wants to win gold. Everyone applying for a job wants to get the job.
True.
It's not the goal that makes the difference. It's what they do to get there.
Exactly. It's the system.
Remember those British cyclists?
Mm-hmm.
They always had the goal of winning the Tour de France.
Yeah.
What changed was their system. The second problem is that even when you achieve a goal, the change is often temporary.
Right.
Right. So think about cleaning a messy room.
Okay.
You can set a goal to clean it. You might even achieve that goal.
Yeah.
But if you don't change the habits that led to the mess in the first place,
Yeah.
it's going to get messy again.
It'll be messy again.
Right. You're just treating the symptom.
Yeah.
You're not addressing the root cause.
Exactly.
Lasting improvement requires you to change the system.
That's right.
Okay, third problem with goals is that they can actually limit your happiness.
Really?
Yeah. There's this idea that once I reach my goal, then I'll be happy,
Right.
right? But this makes you postpone your happiness
Yeah.
until some point in the future.
It does.
And it also creates this either-or mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You either achieve the goal and you're successful, or you don't, and you're a failure.
Yeah.
And that can be pretty harsh.
It can be.
Chapter 1 suggests we cultivate a systems-first mentality, where you find satisfaction in the process itself,
Yeah.
regardless of the outcome.
Makes sense.
And finally, goals can be at odds with long-term progress.
How so?
Well, they give the example of people who train really hard for a marathon, but then they stop running after the race.
Oh, yeah.
The goal was their motivation, and once they achieved it, they had no reason to keep going.
Right.
And this is that classic yo-yo effect.
Yeah.
You make progress, and then you lose it.
Mm.
Chapter 1 says the purpose of goals might be to win the game,
Okay.
but the purpose of systems is to keep playing the game.
I like that.
So true long-term thinking
Yeah.
is actually goalless thinking.
Interesting.
It's about continuous improvement, not reaching a specific endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this leads to the central concept, building a system of atomic habits.
Yes.
And Chapter 1 really emphasizes that if you struggle with your habits,
Yeah.
it's not you, it's your system.
Okay.
Bad habits repeat because of flawed systems.
Oh.
Here's a key takeaway. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems.
Wow.
So in this context, Chapter 1 talks about the deeper meaning of atomic habit.
Yeah.
It's not just a small habit.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small change that's part of a larger system.
Okay.
Think of atoms being the building blocks of molecules.
Right.
Atomic habits are the building blocks of remarkable results.
Makes sense.
They're regular, small, easy-to-do practices
Mm-hmm.
that are actually a source of incredible power.
Wow.
They're components of compound growth.
Okay.
So Chapter 1 ends with this really helpful summary.
Okay.
It reminds us that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement.
Yes.
Small improvements compound significantly over time.
Right.
Habits are a double-edged sword.
Right.
They can work for us or against us.
Yeah.
Small changes often seem insignificant until we reach a critical threshold.
Yeah, like that ice cube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The most powerful outcomes are delayed.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have patience.
Right.
An atomic habit is not an isolated action.
Yeah.
It's part of a system.
Makes sense.
We should focus on systems, not just goals for better results,
Okay.
because you fall to the level of your systems.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that wraps up our deep dive into Chapter 1 of Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Hopefully this has given you a good understanding of why James Clear argues that small changes, they can lead to really big results over time.
It really does. It lays the foundation for a really powerful way of thinking about personal growth and improvement.
Yeah.
It's not about these huge gestures.
Right.
It's about the consistent application of small, well-designed habits within a strong system.
So, considering the power of compounding that we've explored today, here's a final thought for you to consider. What's one tiny habit that you could implement today that if you practiced it consistently over the next year could dramatically alter your